Virginia, I'll start with you. What was your memory of her today when you hear the eulogies and hear the Bishop of London and all that? What's the Mrs. Thatcher, or the Lady Thatcher, that you remember?
Well, she did carve out the way for women. I mean, there were 23 women when I went into the House of Commons. We never thought we'd have a woman Prime Minister, and she was just remarkable. I always think she invented political power dressing. I only got selected in my constituency because I had my hair done exactly like hers, and I wore a suit and a bow like hers. And whenever you saw her, she was sort of impressive, formidable, remarkable. So there was this extraordinary sort of confidence, which I think we've been talking about, came out of being a scientist and being out of a Methodist. She had this clarity. You know, women are always supposed to be full of self-doubt and lacking in confidence. So she had this great vision. And she always knew what the big issue was. I mean, when she said Prague is the centre of Europe, you felt she's right. You know, she brought in Eastern Europe. She recognised that. So she had this wonderful clarity of speech. But to me, I was always daunted by her, I'm afraid.
Frightened of her?
I'm afraid so.
Intimidated.
Well, this is what I never realised until much later. She loved a good argument. And she really wanted to give as good as she got, you know. But I, of course, was much more intimidated as a junior minister. I remember being summoned when she first offered me a ministerial job. And she said it was an environment. So what did I say? I said, well, Prime Minister, I don't know anything about it. So she said, well, you'll just have to read it up, won't you? And of course a man would have said, well, Prime Minister, I'll bring a clear mind to the job. So she had this wonderful certainty, a wonderful woman, an amazing woman who changed politics for women.
Matthew, you worked with her as a very young man, didn't you? Answering her letters, writing speeches as well?
That's when I knew her best. Yes. I was her correspondence clerk when she was Leader of the Opposition and hadn't been Leader of the Opposition for all that long. She was a very different person to work for than to work with. I think she could be very difficult to work with, but as a boss she was absolutely marvellous. She was always in at the office before we were. She never left until long after we had gone.
Is that marvellous? I thought it would
be
nerve-wracking for you. You know, I can't go home yet because she's still working.
No, she inspired us all with a sense of kind of mission. It felt like a team. It felt like a platoon with huge enthusiasm. We adored her.
Did she flirt with you? Because, I mean, most men, I mean, I certainly found when I interviewed her, many occasions, she was always just a little bit flirtatious. Nice tie, David, where did you get it? That sort of thing, you know. I'll get one for Denis, I remember saying once.
She used to lay her hand on your wrist sometimes.
Oh, she never did that.
Yes.
No. I wasn't as close to her.
Dinner with her once, and I was telling her I was going halfway around the world to see the moon and the stars from the top of some great mountain, and she said, don't bother, dear, she said, you'll go halfway around the world, you'll look at the moon and the stars, and you'll think I'm looking at the moon and the stars from halfway around the world. Well, dear, she said, stay here. You can see the moon and the stars from Spalding, she said, holding my wrist. Why Spalding, I often wondered. I've no idea.
Lincolnshire, of course.
Yes.
Near Grantham,
Yes.
Where she came from. So just we've been talking a bit about the commitment to ideas and the way she handled political ideas. Do you think that her focus, almost tunnel vision on particular projects and problems, which was her identifying characteristic, did that also allow a big view about Britain and Britain's place in the world? Because the two things seem in a funny way that they might be in conflict.
The big view was always there, the big view of Britain and Britain's place in the world, pride in Britain, the belief that we could do it, all that kind of thing. That was absolutely kind of hardwired into her. But what Carol, her daughter, sometimes calls the blinkers, I think sometimes stopped her from seeing the little incidental things going on around the outside and made her curiously vulnerable.
Thanks so much. Well, we'll talk a bit more later on, but let's go down to Westminster now, a mile or so away from here, and join Sophie Rayworth again. Sophie.
Well, the crowds have grown considerably in the last half hour. A few hundred people now lining the streets, waiting for the moment at 10 o'clock this morning when Baroness Thatcher's body leaves Westminster for the last time. Now, the funeral may be taking place a few miles away from here at St Paul's, but the Palace of Westminster will still play its own role today, because for the first time since the funeral of Winston Churchill, Big Ben will be silenced. In fact, we have just heard Big Ben chime for the last time this morning at 9:45. We won't hear Big Ben again until 1 o'clock this afternoon. It was seen as a tribute to the late Prime Minister. The only other time that the bells were silent since then was when the clock needed repairs in the 1970s. The Speaker, John Bercow, announced the decision this week, saying it was the best way to mark the occasion. And he said that he felt a profound dignity and deep respect could be expressed in and through silence. Well, when the coffin leaves here for the last time at 10 o'clock this morning, it's going to be a deeply poignant moment for many people. Margaret Thatcher arrived here as an MP in 1959. She is about to leave here for the last time. She will be driven a short distance, a 15-minute drive to the Strand, and Michelle Hussein is there now.
Well, the band of the Royal Marines has just gone past us here, and it is here that the bearer party representing units that fought in the Falklands will take over and the ceremonial procession will begin. And with me, outside St Clement is one Falklands veteran, Major General Jonathan Shaw. General, you were a young officer when Mrs Thatcher made that key speech in Parliament that sent the task force to the South Atlantic. How did you feel listening to her speak that day?
Well, it was an extraordinary moment because it came completely out of the blue. We all just gathered around our radio sets, and hearing her talk, it was just absolutely spine-tingling. We realised this was Maggie's call to arms, and we had to respond. So it was utterly sensational, really, what she said.
And then this long journey began, the journey all the way south to the Falklands. What did the leadership mean to you in those weeks you spent travelling down there?
Well, what we've got to recognise is that when we set off, very few of us thought it would actually lead to war. And it was only when we sailed for the Ascension Island that we thought, crikey, this is really serious, this is going to happen. And for a young lad like me, I was 24, most of my blokes were younger than me, we'd never been to war before, we'd never been in battle before. And what it meant was having this really steely resolve transmitted over the radio waves. We could hear it on the radio and hear it on the news broadcast. Having that steely resolve behind us gave us just what we needed, just the sort of firm support that we needed. It was really inspirational.
And in the years afterwards, did you ever get to meet her?
Yes, I've met her a number of times, but the most important one that sticks in the brain is 1997, 15 years on from the war, when she came to a reunion in Aldershot for the regiment. And all the protocol just went out the window when she came into the gymnasium because the boys just erupted in spontaneous applause and sustained cheering. It was just a celebration of the bond between us and her.
And today, the bearer party that we'll see here have all been chosen because they represent those who fought in the Falklands.
Yes.
What does that mean to the veterans?
Well, I think it's fantastically emblematic of just that bond between the soldiers that fought so hard for her and her. And I think it's a magnificent tribute to them, and I'm very grateful for it happening.
Major General Jonathan Shaw, Falklands veteran. Thank you
very much.
Michelle there at St Clement Danes, and they're just passing out of our picture there. The King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery, followed by the police. If we can see them, you'll see that they're bringing the gun carriage up Whitehall. The streets now on either side closed, the access to them blocked, and these black horses, 6 of them, will pull the hearse, and the officer's charger in the front, huge horse called Mr. Twister. They name all their horses after characters from R.C. Surtees' novels. He's called Mr. Twister, but he's called Bert, more informally, when he's in the stables. So that splendid sight of the Royal Horse Artillery, the King's Troop. And they're coming up exactly the same route as the hearse will go, into Trafalgar Square, down the Strand, and to St Clement Danes. Well now, here I'm joined by somebody who used to write speeches for Lady Thatcher, Michael Dobbs, who's since, of course, written all kinds of books, and in particular, the one whose name's escaped me.
I'm delighted to hear it. A copy will be in the post.
I've read them all and I've seen the movies.
Thank you.
Now, just tell me, I was going to say Queen of Hearts, but just tell me about what it was like writing for her.
Writing speeches.
And I'll say the words House of Cards later on.
Oh, thank you very much. That's kind of you. And writing speeches for her, which I did when she was leader of the opposition, and she was still forming herself, if you like. She'd come from a Finchley housewife, and she wasn't yet quite the Iron Lady. It was an exhausting task. I mean, everybody's been saying this morning how focused she was. And she would focus on a speech and go through so many different drafts because she wanted perfection. She wasn't a great orator, but she was a superb speech maker. And she would work until the very early hours of the morning. I mean, she completely exhausted me, and I would be trying to stay awake and keep up with her. But we would be sitting there 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. She would be in her night clothes, and often her Carmen curlers. And
Norman Tebbit just arriving, sorry to interrupt you,
Ah.
at St Paul's Cathedral, who's one of her greatest, staunchest supporters, really, down many years,
Absolutely.
injured in the bomb blast.
the last man in the trench when she eventually went.
And said in the House of Commons that there's F.W. de Klerk, the former president of South Africa. He said in the House of Commons that he felt he'd left her to her friends and they'd betrayed her, didn't he?
Yes, the only thing he regretted, he said,
Yes.
was that he had left her to the mercy of her friends.
Yes.
I was his chief of staff at that time, and I believe I was probably the first person after Margaret Thatcher that he told that he wasn't going to be putting himself forward for the cabinet after the election, that his priority was to take care of his wife who'd been so cruelly injured in the bombing of the Grand Hotel. It was a terrible difficulty for him to confront, but he had to confront it.
What did you mean when you said she wasn't a great orator, but she was a great speechwriter? Do you mean she was strong on content but not on delivery? Because the things we've seen, U-turn if you want to, the ladies not for turning, have gone down in history, haven't they?
There'll be many Tory party faithful who disagree with me and say that they were enraptured by her speeches. I think that her speeches were better known and better remembered for the content rather than sometimes the difficulties she had in delivering them. As a woman, she had so many mountains to climb, and one of those was her voice and her ability to be able to project it in a way which men would find, with their lower voices, would find much more natural.
Matthew?
She had the rhetorical power of an electric drill. It was effective. But
Sorry to interrupt you. Ed Miliband just there standing outside. We're keeping an eye on the people who come. Ed Miliband, leader of the opposition, who'll be sitting in the front row and who spoke about her. Nigel Lawson, who was her Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Who she famously told to, when he became Chancellor of the Exchequer, to get his hair cut.
He never did he? Ignored the advice. Nigel Lawson was one of those who resigned, as Geoffrey Howe did as Foreign Secretary. Geoffrey Howe, I think, will be here as well. And behind the beginning of the ranks of the diplomatic corps. Matthew, sorry, go on.
yeah, it was rather difficult to write jokes for her. She very often didn't get the jokes, and she didn't always deliver them very well. That dead parrot joke, for instance, she'd never seen the Monty Python. It was quite...
And she was never satisfied. She would go on working on her speeches till the very last minute. I remember one occasion where I think we were in Scotland. She had actually left the hotel to go to the conference hall to make the speech, and secretaries were still kneeling on the floor, banging away at the typewriter, finishing off the last few pages. I mean, sometimes it was a very close call.
Yes, and she was pacing up and down once. Ronnie Miller was writing a speech for her. She was about to make it, and he said, "Don't worry, Prime Minister, piece of cake, Prime Minister." And she said, "Cake, Ronnie, I'm about to make a speech."
There,
Yes.
very good. So what are the qualities? I mean, you've made your living after you left politics by writing about politics. What are the qualities that make her a politician deserving of what's happening here at St Paul's this morning?
Well, it's a very interesting question. I do think this will be the last time we see such an occasion. I think from now on in, it will be, these sort of occasions will be for the senior royals only. There is a real sense of the end of an era, not only the passing of a lady, but the end of an era of that type of politics.
Chris Batten there, who worked with her to win elections, worked for the Conservative Research Department, is now chairman of the BBC with the spectacles on, his wife behind him.
And it's interesting that almost all the men that we have been pointing out here...
John Major arriving.
Another one.
Successor.
She would have great fallings out with, great rows with, and yet they're still coming here to do her homage and honour. She had a wonderful capacity.
Sir John Major, for instance, who said her behaviour to him over Europe was intolerable, but actually was also very generous about her in his...
Yes, so he gave him a very hard time.
And Tony Blair, I think, just arriving at the door with Cherie Blair.
I wonder what she would make of all this. I half can hear her saying, "What is all this hoo-ha about? How much did this cost, dear?" I could hear her saying.
Yes, she would certainly,
Yes.
certainly worry about
But yet
that.
yes, it's interesting. She planned the funeral service. The idea that it would be held in St Paul's Cathedral was not hers, is my information. That came later, and perhaps came from St Paul's, and she then agreed to it. So it was the content of the service that mattered to her.
Yeah.
And of course, the gun carriage and all that all happened subsequently.
Yes. Interesting.
It is, and if you read the service, it's very, very interesting to oh well, this is the coffin coming out from Westminster now, to be taken to the hearse from St Mary Undercroft.
Are they in progress?
These are undertakers from the Leverton family who served the Queen Mother and Princess Diana's funeral. An old family business. It's rather interesting. They were founded in Devon in 1789, the same year as the French Revolution, and they've been undertakers ever since. They're into their 9th generation. And they say, I was talking to them at the rehearsal 2 days ago, that their part in this is not part at all of the ceremony. Their job is just to move the coffin from here as discreetly and carefully as possible to the church of St Clement Danes, where it will be put on the gun carriage and the formal part of the thing will begin. Down here at Westminster there is silence. There are no crowds, there's no music, there's the silence from Big Ben because it's coming up to 10 o'clock. Just the chaplains who attend at St Mary's, the Dean of Westminster Abbey, and one of their members who sat all night with the coffin. Everywhere the body is taken, the place that receives it holds prayers. So the Speaker's chaplain, for instance, sat with the coffin all last night down here at Westminster, and in St Clement Danes, as soon as the coffin is brought in to be prepared for the gun carriage, there'll be more prayers. So wherever the body is, prayers are being said. There's a police escort in front, and the police are just starting, and we expect at 10 o'clock, because the bells at St Paul, or the clock at St Paul's, are still striking. Unlike Big Ben, they will set off, and there they go. This whole event has had to be very carefully timed, like all these things, so they leave at exactly the moment they said, at 10 o'clock. No ceremony, just the hearse. Driving away into Parliament Square. It'll go past Winston Churchill's statue. St Margaret's, Westminster, the church on the left there. The white building beyond with the towers, the Treasury building, with which she did such battle to get control of the economy when she came into office. Always tension between Prime Ministers and Treasury. She's now coming up Whitehall, and there are people here, though they will only see this brief glimpse. Crowds on either side have come out. And there you can see people applauding, and indeed hear them applauding. so far there are no signs of the protests that we'd heard might happen, but it does seem as though, as the police themselves said, there's a lower expectation of trouble than they originally had. There was this event on Saturday at Trafalgar Square when people gathered to protest, but here it seems to be mainly a crowd just watching and applauding her as she goes past. Comes past the Women at War Memorial, that black plinth that is put up just beyond the cenotaph for the work of women at war. Perhaps suitable that she who fought the Falklands War against much advice and triumphed in it should go past that memorial. And the hearse now comes up towards Trafalgar Square. And there it'll turn into the Strand and go towards St Clement Danes. So round under Nelson's column and turning to the right towards the Strand. So this grey day here in London, and at St Paul's, the Cathedral now filling the Archbishop of Canterbury arriving. And John Sentamu, the Archbishop of York. The two archbishops arriving, very much unrobed. Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London there. Michael Portillo, who served no government, has left politics now. There are figures from her administration. There are people who ran her cabinet office, like Lord Armstrong is here. David Steele, Lord Owen, John Major there talking to the Foreign Secretary, William Hague. Catherine Jenkins, the singer, one of a number of celebrity guests like Sir Terry Wogan, who was in here, and Tom King, who served as Secretary of State in Northern Ireland, Lord King as he now is. Michael Heseltine just arriving, coming up the steps. And this is the view from the church of St Clement Danes. It's here that the real part of the procession, or the ceremonial part of the procession, begins, with the route liners all the way up from here to St Paul's, made up of the three services, and as always in military affairs, starting with the Royal Air Force, then the Army, the 1st Battalion Welsh Guards, fought in the Falklands War, and then finally the Royal Navy and the Royal Marines. street line is now already in place, 9 paces apart, and they were all out here on Monday for the rehearsal. The church of St Clement Danes is just there on the right. As the hearse arrives at St Clement Danes. The coffin will be met here by the Chaplain-in-Chief of the Royal Air Force, the Venerable Ray Pentland, and the Reverend David Osborne, who's the resident chaplain here.